In 1977, the submersible's lights found tall chimneys on the seafloor, belching black water like smoke. We thought they were natural. Then we saw the seams, perfect hexagons in the rock, plates opening and closing like a machine breathing. The vents didn't just heat the water, they timed it. Our gauges ticked in strange rhythms. Sonar returned a steady pulse that sounded like a word said very slowly. When we spelled it out, the message was simple and cold in English we had not yet learned. For later. The chimneys were not volcanoes. They were waiting rooms for power. My grandfather, Dr. Theodore Blackwater, was aboard the research vessel Nor that February morning off the Galapagos Rift. He never talked about what they found down there, not until the cancer took his voice and left him scribbling notes on yellow legal pads with hands that shook like autumn leaves. I'm telling this story now because the power companies have started drilling again. The same coordinates, the same depth, and yesterday my electricity bill showed negative usage for the third month running. The official discovery reports mention tube worms and exotic bacteria around hydrothermal vents, revolutionary findings for marine biology. What they don't mention is why Grandpa Ted spent the next 46 years checking his watch every 7 minutes, or why he built that Faraday cage in his basement and sat in it for 3 hours every Tuesday. The notes he left me paint a different picture, sketches of those hexagonal seams, measurements that don't match any geological survey, temperature readings that made no damn sense, water hot enough to melt copper flowing next to patches cold enough to freeze saltwater solid. And always, always, those timing patterns. "The vent's nowhere here," he wrote in his final entry. "They've been counting down since before the first human drew breath. We just happened to notice during their final calibration cycle." I found his research buried in waterproof cases inside that basement cage. 46 years of obsessive documentation, cross-referenced with global power grid failures, tectonic activity, and something he called temporal anchor points. The data suggests the vents aren't just heating water, they're storing something, energy that builds and builds, following a rhythm older than civilization. 3 days ago, seismographs detected new activity along the Galapagos Rift, the same signature Grandpa Ted recorded in 1977, but amplified, stronger. The timing intervals have shortened from 7 minutes to 6. My name is Marcus Blackwater, and I'm the last person alive who knows what those vents really are. The power companies think they've found a new geothermal energy source. The governments think it's a natural phenomenon worth studying. They're both wrong. The vents aren't a discovery, they're a countdown timer. And according to Grandpa Ted's calculations, they finish counting tomorrow at 3:47 a.m. Pacific Standard Time. I'm heading to the Alvin Research Station in Woods Hole tonight. If you don't hear from me again, remember this. When your lights flicker in perfect 7-second intervals, don't assume it's the power grid failing. It's the power grid waking up. The Woods Hole. Oceanographic Institution looked exactly like every other research facility I'd visited. Sterile white buildings squatting beside the Atlantic like oversized refrigerators. At 2:14 a.m., the parking lot held maybe 6 cars and a maintenance truck with 1 flat tire. The security guard, Jimmy Kowalski, according to his badge, barely glanced at my grandfather's research credentials before waving me through. "Bit early for a dive, isn't it?" Jimmy asked, his coffee mug steaming in the February cold. "Emergency consultation," I lied. "Family research project." The main laboratory building hummed with the kind of low-frequency vibration that made your fillings itch. Backup generators, probably, though the power grid showed green across all monitoring stations. I checked twice on the drive down from Boston. Every electrical system on the eastern seaboard was running perfectly. Too perfectly. Load balancing algorithms don't naturally create sine waves that precise. Dr. Benjamin Hatch found me in the deep submersible prep bay, staring at the Alvin's titanium hull. The legendary research sub looks smaller than I'd expected, like a metal egg designed by engineers with claustrophobia and trust issues. Hatch was younger than me by maybe 5 years, with the pale complexion of someone who spent more time underwater than in sunlight. "You're Blackwater's grandson," he said, not a question. "Heard you might be coming around. Your grandfather's work on thermal gradient mapping was legendary around here." That's one word for it. I pulled out Grandpa Ted's waterproof research case. I need to verify some coordinates, the 1977 Galapagos expedition data. Hatch's expression shifted, something between curiosity and caution. Those files are restricted. National Science Foundation directive. Your grandfather signed a pretty comprehensive non-disclosure agreement back in the day. He's dead. NDAs don't expire with the signatory. I opened the case anyway. Grandpa Ted's sketches spread across the prep table like tarot cards predicting technological apocalypse. The hexagonal seam drawings, temperature charts that made no geological sense, and those timing calculations stretching across 46 years of obsessive documentation. Hatch leaned closer despite himself. His fingers traced one of the hexagon diagrams, and I noticed his wedding ring had a curious design, interlocking geometric patterns that looked almost familiar. "Jesus Christ," he whispered. "Where did he get these measurements?" Direct observation. Depth charges for sonar mapping, core samples, spectrographic analysis of the water chemistry. I pointed to a data table. These readings show synchronized thermal cycles across 17 different vent sites, perfectly synchronized, like they're all connected to the same power source. That's impossible. Hydrothermal vents are isolated geological events, random thermal expression through seafloor fissures. Random. I pulled out Grandpa Ted's most recent calculations. These show the thermal cycles speeding up. 7-minute intervals in 1977, 6 minutes and 43 seconds last week. Still think it's random. Hatch studied the numbers. His coffee went cold while he cross-referenced dates with tectonic activity reports, his fingers moving across his tablet with the quick precision of someone accustomed to data analysis under pressure. The prep bay's fluorescent lights flickered once, just a quick stutter that might have been nothing. "The power fluctuation," he said suddenly. "You felt that too." I nodded. "Building's been humming since I got here. Frequency's wrong for standard backup generators." "It's not the generators." Hatch moved to a monitoring station and pulled up real-time seismic data from the Atlantic Ridge. "Look at this. Micro tremors along the entire mid-Atlantic system. Started 3 days ago. Same signature as your grandfather's Galapagos readings." The fluorescent lights flickered again. This time the pattern held for exactly 6 seconds. "We need to get down there," I said. "The Alvin's scheduled for a routine maintenance dive tomorrow morning. Pre-certified crew, established mission parameters." Hatch hesitated. "But if you're suggesting what I think you're suggesting..." "I'm suggesting my grandfather documented something that defies every assumption we have about geothermal energy, and whatever he found is accelerating." Hatch closed his tablet. "The dive prep takes 4 hours minimum, safety protocols, equipment checks, atmospheric calibration. We can't just drop into the deep Atlantic on a hunch." "It's not a hunch." I showed him Grandpa Ted's final calculation. According to this, the thermal cycles reach critical synchronization tomorrow at 3:47 a.m. If he's right about the power storage capacity. If he's right, we're talking about energy output equivalent to a small nuclear plant, distributed across hundreds of vent sites. Hatch ran both hands through his hair. The implications for global power distribution alone. The building's electrical hum changed pitch, something deeper, more resonant. The prep bay's computers automatically saved their work files and switched to battery backup, even though the main power grid showed no interruption. "That's not supposed to happen," Hatch said. I packed up Grandpa Ted's research. "How long to prep for an emergency dive?" 2 hours if we skip the non-essential safety checks." "Skip them." Hatch stared at me for a long moment. "You realize what you're asking? If your grandfather's data is accurate, we could be dropping into the middle of a geological event that science hasn't even classified yet. The alternative is waiting to see what happens when those vents finish their countdown." He nodded slowly. "I'll wake the night crew. We launch at 4:30 a.m. As I watched Hatch disappear into the communications bay, the building's electrical hum settled into a rhythm I recognized. 6 minutes and 43 seconds of steady vibration, followed by a brief pause, then the cycle repeated, exactly matching the intervals Grandpa Ted had calculated. The countdown was accelerating, and we were running out of time to understand what we were counting down to. The Alvin's cramped interior smelled like recycled air and 40 years of human anxiety. 3 spherical windows gave us a view of absolute darkness as we descended past the continental shelf. At 800 meters, Hatch killed the exterior floods and switched to passive sonar to avoid disturbing whatever we might find. Your grandfather's coordinates put the primary thermal cluster at 2,847 meters, he said, adjusting the ballast controls. We should start picking up temperature variations in about 20 minutes. I pressed my face against the porthole. The water outside was so black it seemed solid, like we were falling through space instead of descending through the Atlantic. The Alvin's hull creaked with each pressure adjustment, a sound that reminded me of Grandpa Ted's old house settling in winter storms. Tell me about the other expeditions, I said. The ones after 1977. Hatch's jaw tightened. What other expeditions? I pulled out one of Grandpa Ted's notebooks, flipping to a page marked with red ink. November 1983, January 1991, August 2003, December 2019. Same coordinates, same thermal readings, different research teams each time. Those were routine geological surveys. Bullshit. I showed him the data. Each expedition found the hexagonal formations. Each team filed preliminary reports mentioning artificial geometric structures. Then the reports got classified and the researchers signed expanded NDAs. The sonar pinged steadily against the seafloor below. At 2,200 meters, the first temperature spike registered on our sensors, a 20-degree increase in ambient water temperature that made no sense for this depth and location. There, Hatch pointed to his thermal imaging display, bearing 347 degrees, multiple heat signatures. What we found wasn't anything like the textbook descriptions of hydrothermal vents. The formations rose from the seafloor like a city designed by alien architects. Perfectly geometric spires, each one exactly 23.7 meters tall, arranged in hexagonal clusters that extended beyond our lights could reach. The vents themselves weren't crude rock chimneys belching superheated water. They were precise thermal outlets with mechanical iris openings that expanded and contracted in synchronized patterns. Jesus fucking Christ, Hatch whispered. Those aren't natural formations. I activated the external cameras and started recording. The thermal outlets operated with clockwork precision. 6 minutes and 43 seconds of steady heat discharge, followed by complete shutdown. Then the cycle repeated. But now I could see the mechanism. Metallic components embedded in what appeared to be grown rock, like someone had convinced Livingstone to incorporate advanced engineering. The hexagonal seams, I said, they're not cracks. They're access panels. As we drifted closer, the Alvin's magnetic sensors went haywire. The needles spun wildly before settling on a reading that should have been impossible, negative magnetic variance, as if the formations were somehow repelling Earth's magnetic field rather than interacting with it. We need samples, Hatch said, extending the mechanical arm toward the nearest formation. The arm's titanium grasper closed around what looked like a piece of naturally formed basalt. Instead of breaking away like normal rock, the sample detached along perfectly smooth lines, revealing internal structures that belonged in a semiconductor factory, not on the ocean floor. The moment we extracted the sample, every thermal outlet in the cluster shifted to a new rhythm. 5 minutes and 12 seconds. The countdown was accelerating. We triggered something, I said. Hatch was already adjusting our position, moving the Alvin to the next cluster. Your grandfather's notes mention 17 different sites, if they're all connected. The communications array crackled with static, then cleared to reveal something impossible. A transmission from the surface, but not from our support vessel. The voice was crisp, professional, and speaking with an accent I couldn't place. Deep survey vessel, this is Meridian Station. You are conducting unauthorized research in a restricted zone. Surface immediately. Meridian Station. Hatch grabbed the radio. This is Alvin on official WHOI research mission. We have no record of any Meridian Station in this area. Static answered him. Our surface support ship, Atlantis, responded 30 seconds later. Alvin, this is surface control. We show no other vessels in the area. Who was that transmission from? Unknown contact claiming authority over these coordinates, Hatch replied, requesting clarification on any restricted zone designations. While Hatch argued with surface control, I studied the thermal formations through the porthole. The synchronized heat cycles were beautiful in their precision, like watching a massive engine warm up. But engines needed fuel, and these formations were extracting energy from sources our instruments couldn't identify. Marcus, Hatch's voice carried a new edge. Look at this. He'd repositioned us above a different cluster, one where the seafloor showed obvious signs of excavation. Trenches cut in perfect geometric patterns, filled with cables that definitely weren't natural. The cables snaked between thermal outlets, connecting the separate formations into what was clearly a unified power grid. This is infrastructure, I said. Someone built this. Not someone, somewhen. Hatch pointed to the sediment layers around the excavated trenches. These formations have been here for thousands of years, maybe longer, but the connecting infrastructure is recent, last 50 years, maybe less. The sample container in the Alvin's storage compartment started emitting a low humming sound. As we watched, the rock sample began to glow with internal light, pulsing in the same rhythm as the thermal outlets outside. It's still connected, I realized. Even separated from the main formation, it's still part of the system. Our communications array exploded with overlapping transmissions, surface vessels converging on our coordinates, military frequencies mixing with civilian emergency channels. Someone had noticed our unauthorized dive, and they were mobilizing resources to stop us. "Alvin, surface immediately," came the official order from a voice that definitely wasn't our research team. "You are interfering with classified operations." Hatch switched off the radio. "We've got maybe 20 minutes before they force us up." I studied Grandpa Ted's calculations one more time. The thermal cycles were now running at 5-minute intervals. According to his projections, critical synchronization would occur in less than 18 hours. "There's something else," I said, flipping to the notebook's final pages. "The power storage calculations. If these formations are collecting and storing geothermal energy on this scale, the total accumulated output over 46 years would be..." I stopped talking. The numbers didn't make sense. The energy storage capacity was too large, too precise, not just for powering cities or even countries. This was power infrastructure for something much bigger. "How much?" Hatch asked. "Enough to alter planetary magnetic fields or jumpstart a dead world's climate systems." The sample container's humming intensified. Through the porthole, I watched the thermal outlets adjust their rhythm again. 4 minutes and 17 seconds now. The acceleration was becoming exponential. "We need to get back to the surface," Hatch said. "Whatever your grandfather discovered, it's bigger than just hydrothermal energy. Someone's been using these formations to build something, and they don't want us documenting it." As we began our ascent, the external cameras caught movement in the deepest sections of the formation. Not geological activity, deliberate motion. Components repositioning themselves, preparing for something. The sample in our storage compartment pulsed brighter. And somewhere in the darkness below us, 17 thermal power stations continued their countdown to an event that would either save humanity or replace it entirely. We just didn't know which yet. The Alvin broke the surface at 6:23 a.m. to find the Atlantic crawling with vessels that shouldn't have existed. 3 destroyers formed a perimeter around the Atlantis, while unmarked helicopters circled overhead like mechanical vultures. The research ship's crew stood on deck with their hands visible, surrounded by sailors in uniforms I didn't recognize. "This is fucked," Hatch said, killing the Alvin's engines. "How did they mobilize this fast?" The sample container continued its rhythmic humming. Through the Alvin's hull, I felt the vibrations synchronizing with my pulse. 4 minutes and 17 seconds of steady frequency, followed by brief silence, then repetition. The rock fragment glowed brighter with each cycle. Our radio crackled to life. "Submersible Alvin, this is Commander Walsh, United States Navy Special Operations. Prepare for immediate boarding and sample transfer." "Special Operations doesn't handle marine research," Hatch said. "This isn't military jurisdiction." "Tell that to them." I pointed to the Zodiac boats cutting across the water toward us. armed personnel in black tactical gear, moving with the efficiency of people who'd done this before. Hatch's wedding ring caught the morning sunlight, those geometric patterns reflecting in ways that reminded me of the hexagonal formations below. I'd noticed him fidgeting with it during our entire ascent, twisting it around his finger like a nervous habit. "How long have you been married?" I asked. "What kind of question is that?" "Just curious, that's an unusual design." His jaw tightened. "Family heirloom. Been in the Walsh family for generations." "Walsh?" I stared at him. "Like Commander Walsh?" The Zodiac boats were 50 meters away now, close enough to see the faces of the armed personnel, the specialized equipment they carried. Close enough to realize they weren't just military, they were extraction specialists. "Ben, what the hell is going on?" He wouldn't meet my eyes. "Your grandfather wasn't supposed to find those formations in 1977. The discovery was 60 years ahead of schedule. We've been managing the situation ever since." The sample container's humming shifted to a higher frequency. The rock fragment wasn't just glowing anymore, it was generating heat. Enough heat to make the storage compartment's metal walls too hot to touch. The formations aren't power stations for Earth's future," Hatch said quietly. "They're power stations for Earth's replacement. My family has been watching those coordinates for 4 generations, waiting for the system to come online." I reached for the emergency release on the sample container, but Hatch grabbed my wrist. His grip was stronger than it should have been, and his skin felt wrong, too warm, almost feverish. "Don't," he said. "Removing the sample from containment at this stage would trigger immediate activation. Every thermal formation on the planet would go live simultaneously." "Activation of what?" "Terraforming protocols, climate adjustment, atmospheric conversion." He finally looked at me, and his eyes held the flat, patient expression of someone explaining something obvious to a child. "The vents aren't warming Earth's oceans, they're cooling them, adjusting the chemical composition, making the planet more suitable for the next phase." The Zodiac boats pulled alongside the Alvin. Armed personnel secured boarding lines while their commander studied us through tactical binoculars. They moved with the practiced coordination of people who'd performed this exact operation multiple times. "How many other discoveries have you managed?" I asked. 17 major sites. Your grandfather found the first one by accident. Dr. Martinez in 1983 was getting too close to the thermal signatures. Professor Williams in 1991 started asking questions about mineral composition. Dr. Thompson in 2003 noticed the geometric formations. Dr. Singh in 2019 figured out the power storage calculations. All the researchers who'd found the formations asked the right questions, then disappeared into classified projects or died in convenient accidents. What happened to them? They joined the program, or they were replaced by people who understood the bigger picture. The sample container's metal housing began to glow cherry red. Warning alarms activated throughout the Alvin's cabin as internal temperatures spiked beyond safe parameters. The rock fragment inside pulsed faster now, its rhythm matching the acceleration I'd calculated from Grandpa Ted's notes. 3 minutes and 42 seconds, I said, watching the timing display. "It's speeding up exponentially." "Because you took it from the formation," Hatch replied. "The system interprets removal as a threat. It's accelerating the activation sequence to protect itself." Armed personnel boarded the Alvin with practiced efficiency. Their team leader, a compact man with lieutenant's bars and cold eyes, immediately moved to the overheating sample container. "Status report, Dr. Hatch. Sample extracted at 03:47 hours. Thermal acceleration within predicted parameters. Subject has been briefed on basic operational security." The lieutenant studied me with the expression of someone evaluating livestock. "Mr. Blackwater, your grandfather's research has been invaluable to our understanding of the terraforming timeline. We're prepared to offer you the same consulting arrangement. And if I refuse?" Refusal isn't typically an option in situations involving planetary transition protocols. The sample container's housing finally failed. Superheated metal cracked open like an egg, revealing the rock fragment suspended in a bubble of energy that hurt to observe directly. The fragment itself had transformed, no longer crude stone but a perfect geometric crystal that pulsed with internal fire. The moment it was exposed to open air, every electronic device within 100 meters shut down. The Alvin's instruments died. The Zodiac boat's engines stopped. The helicopters overhead lost power and auto-rotated toward emergency landings in the ocean. But that wasn't the worst part. The worst part was watching Lieutenant Commander Walsh, because of course he was related to Hatch somehow, undergo his own transformation. His skin took on the same internal glow as the crystal fragment. His eyes shifted from brown to the color of heated copper. When he spoke again, his voice carried harmonics that made my bones ache. Activation threshold achieved. Terraforming protocols now online. Estimated completion time, 7 hours, 36 minutes. Jesus Christ, Ben, I said, what have you people done? But Hatch was changing too. The geometric patterns on his wedding ring weren't just reflecting light anymore. They were generating it. The same hexagonal designs I'd seen on the seafloor formations, carved into the metal and now glowing with the same energy as the crystal. We didn't do anything, he said, his voice acquiring the same resonant quality as the lieutenant's. We just stopped interfering with a process that started long before humans existed. Through the Alvin's portholes, I watched the ocean around us begin to change. The water took on a phosphorescent quality, swirling in patterns that matched the geometric formations below. In the distance, steam rose from the surface as thermal vents throughout the Atlantic Ridge activated simultaneously. The formations aren't human technology, Hatch continued. They're automated systems left by whoever was here before us. Earth's previous tenants, preparing the planet for their return. We've just been caretakers. The crystal fragment's energy field expanded, encompassing the entire Alvin. Every metal surface began to resonate with the same frequency. I could feel the vibration in my teeth, my bones, the electrical activity of my nervous system. Your grandfather understood, eventually, Lieutenant Commander Walsh said. The formations don't just store power. They store consciousness, memory, the essence of whatever species built them. Every time we extract samples, study the formations, try to understand their purpose, we're completing their reactivation sequence. I realized with sick clarity what Grandpa Ted had really discovered in 1977. Not just thermal formations, but an entire civilization's backup plan. A way to rebuild their species after whatever catastrophe had originally ended their time on Earth. And every human who'd studied the formations had become another component in their resurrection system. The Alvin's hull began to glow. I was running out of time to remain human. The sample, I said, if I destroy it. You can't, Hatch replied, his transformation almost complete now. It's not separate from the system anymore. None of us are. We're all components now, Marcus. All of us helping them come home. The crystal's energy field reached my skin and I felt the first change begin. A warmth that started in my bones and spread outward like liquid electricity. 7 hours and 36 minutes until terraforming completion. And I was about to become part of the system that would erase humanity to make room for Earth's original owners. The transformation burned like swallowing molten copper. I bit down hard enough to crack a molar as the alien energy rewrote my cellular structure, fighting to maintain some fragment of my original consciousness while my nervous system learned new ways to process reality. But something was wrong with my conversion. While Hatch and Lieutenant Commander Walsh moved with fluid coordination, their transformations complete and seamless, mine stuttered and sparked like a damaged machine. The geometric patterns that should have appeared beneath my skin flickered inconsistently. The enhanced awareness that allowed them to communicate with the thermal formations came and went in painful waves. Genetic incompatibility, Walsh observed, studying me with eyes that now held the depth of molten gold. Approximately 12% of the human population carries immunity factors. Usually not a problem, the conversion process adapts. Usually, I gasped, doubled over as another wave of cellular restructuring hit. Your grandfather's bloodline carries specific genetic markers, Hatch said, his voice now perfectly synchronized with Walsh's, as if they were components of the same distributed intelligence. Nordic ancestry, particular mitochondrial sequences. The builders programmed safeguards against their own genetic signatures. The Alvin lurched as something massive surfaced beneath us. Through the portholes, I watched impossible architecture rise from the depths, not the simple thermal formations we'd discovered, but entire cities of living metal and grown stone. Spires that twisted according to non-Euclidean geometry, platforms that existed in too many dimensions simultaneously. The thermal vents were never the main installation, Hatch continued. They were just the power supply for the real infrastructure: hibernation complexes, consciousness storage matrices, genetic reconstruction facilities. The alien cities stretched beyond the horizon, their surfaces crawling with movement as millions of stored minds downloaded into newly grown bodies. The builders hadn't gone extinct. They'd been sleeping, waiting for their automated systems to prepare Earth for their return. How long? I asked, watching a creature that might once have been human pilot a living ship between the impossible towers. 200 million years, Walsh replied. They left when the Permian extinction began, took the best of their civilization off-world, and left the terraforming systems to reset the planet for their eventual return. I staggered to the Alvin's communications array, hands shaking as my immune system fought the ongoing conversion. The radio was dead, but Grandpa Ted's waterproof research case had survived the energy pulse. Inside, beneath 46 years of thermal calculations, I found what I was really looking for: his personal journals from after 1977. The entries painted a very different picture than his public research: nightmares about drowning in copper-colored light, visions of vast cities rising from ocean trenches, and calculations, not about thermal energy storage, but about genetic compatibility rates and extinction timeline projections. He knew, I said, reading his cramped handwriting. Grandpa Ted figured it out decades ago. Dr. Theodore Blackwater was invaluable to our preparation efforts, Walsh acknowledged. His research helped us identify optimal activation conditions and genetic conversion protocols. Unfortunately, his immunity to the process made direct integration impossible. So you just let him document everything for 46 years, knowing he'd eventually pass the information to someone else. We encouraged his research, provided subtle guidance through controlled information releases. His obsessive documentation served multiple purposes: genetic mapping of immunity factors, timeline verification, and eventual recruitment of compatible bloodline members. Compatible? The burning sensation was subsiding, but not in the way it had for Hatch and Walsh. Instead of successful integration, my immune system was rejecting the alien modifications entirely. The geometric patterns under my skin faded rather than stabilizing. Your grandmother was builder's stock, Hatch said. Genetic lineage from the original inhabitants. Your grandfather's Nordic ancestry carries natural immunities to the conversion process. The combination created a hybrid resistance we hadn't anticipated. I pulled up Grandpa Ted's final entries, dated just 3 weeks before his death. His calculations showed a very different countdown than what I'd understood. The thermal formations weren't building to a terraforming event. They were building to a genetic purge. 7 hours and 36 minutes until every human without builder genetics was systematically eliminated. You're not bringing back your original species, I realized. You're creating a new one. Human builder hybrids with the immunity factors bred out. Humans are remarkably adaptable hosts, Walsh agreed. Superior to our original biological forms in many ways, the terraforming process will preserve the best aspects of both species while eliminating problematic genetic variants. The alien cities continued rising around us. Creatures that had once been human moved through the waters with purposeful coordination, their transformed bodies perfectly adapted to the changing ocean chemistry. They looked content, fulfilled, like people who'd finally found their true calling. That scared me more than anything else. The immunity isn't random, I said, studying Grandpa Ted's genetic analysis charts. You specifically left bloodlines with builder genetics unconverted. Natural selection pressure to ensure successful hybrid offspring. Correct. Your bloodline represents optimal breeding stock for the next phase of species development. And the phase after that? Neither of them answered, but I could see it in their synchronized expressions. The hybrid generation was temporary. Once the human population had been successfully integrated, the builder consciousness would assert dominance, gradually erasing the human components entirely. What we were witnessing wasn't salvation or evolution, it was sophisticated genocide with a multi-generational timeline. My partial immunity was wearing off. The conversion process resumed with renewed intensity, but now I understood what Grandpa Ted had really left me. Not just research data, but genetic instructions encoded in his journal margins. Sequences that matched my mitochondrial DNA paired with activation codes for systems even the builders had forgotten. "There's something else," I said, transcribing the genetic sequences onto the Alvin's navigation computer. "The Nordic bloodlines you're afraid of, they're not just immune to your conversion process. They're immune because they carry builder genetic markers from a different faction, one that opposed the terraforming project." The synchronized expression on Hatch and Walsh's faces shifted to something like concern. "Your original species had a civil war," I continued, working through Grandpa Ted's final calculations. "The faction that left Earth disagreed with the faction that stayed behind to manage the terraforming systems. The genetic immunities aren't random, they're loyalty markers. The alien cities around us pulsed with increased activity. Whatever I just figured out, the builder consciousness didn't want me sharing it with anyone. The thermal formations respond to genetic commands from authorized bloodlines," I said, entering the sequences into the navigation system. Grandpa Ted spent 46 years mapping those command structures. He wasn't just documenting the countdown, he was learning how to override it. Walsh moved toward me with inhuman speed, but the Alvin systems had already accepted the genetic authorization codes. Every display screen flickered to life with new interface options, builder technology that had been dormant for millions of years, waiting for the right genetic key to unlock it. I had approximately 6 hours to figure out how to use an alien command system to prevent the extermination of humanity. The converted humans around us were already mobilizing to stop me. And somewhere in the depths below, 17 thermal power stations continued their countdown to species replacement, now fully aware that someone with the genetic authority to shut them down was still alive and fighting back. The builder interface responded to my genetic signature like a piano recognizing a master's touch. Holographic displays materialized around the Alvin's cramped interior, showing real-time status updates from terraforming installations across 17 ocean basins. Each installation pulsed with the synchronized rhythm I'd grown to dread, but now I could see the underlying command structure: authorization protocols, override mechanisms, emergency shutdown sequences. "Impressive," Walsh said, his transformed features showing something like admiration. "Dr. Blackwater's genetic mapping was more complete than we realized. You have access to Faction 7 authorization codes." Faction 7? The opposition party. They attempted to prevent the terraforming project through sabotage of the hibernation systems. Hatch moved to block my access to the navigation controls, his movements now fluid and inhuman. Unfortunately, their efforts only delayed the inevitable. I navigated deeper into the command hierarchy, following pathways that Grandpa Ted's genetic sequences had unlocked. The builder systems were elegant in their complexity, biological computing matrices that had grown and evolved over millions of years, learning to anticipate and counter every possible form of interference. "There," I said, finding what looked like a master control node. "Global terraforming suspension, emergency protocols for species preservation." The interface showed 17 installation sites, their thermal output synchronized to a master timing signal. But as I reached for the shutdown command, the holographic displays shifted. New information cascaded across the screens, data that made my stomach drop toward my feet. The 17 thermal installations weren't the complete system, they were just the first wave. Phase 1 of 4, I read from the status displays. Current installations represent 12% of total terraforming infrastructure. Walsh's expression carried something like pity. "Did you think we would risk our species' return on 17 thermal vents? The deep sea installations were always just the activation sequence. The real terraforming matrix has been building itself for 2 centuries. The holographic map expanded, showing the true scope of the builder project. Every major volcanic system on Earth carried dormant installations. Every tectonic plate boundary housed hibernation complexes. Every deep ocean trench contained manufacturing facilities that had been producing hybrid bodies for decades. The converted humans we've been creating aren't just random individuals, Hatch said. They're specifically chosen genetic templates, government officials, military commanders, research scientists, corporate executives, people in positions to facilitate the next phase. I pulled up personnel records, cross-referencing names with government databases that the builder systems had somehow infiltrated. The list was staggering. Senators, generals, university presidents, technology company CEOs. All of them converted over the past 20 years, all of them strategically positioned to prevent interference with Phase 2. Jesus Christ, I whispered. How long have you been planning this? Planning assumes this is our project, Walsh replied. We're just components in a system that was designed before your species existed. The builders didn't leave Earth. They went dormant and integrated with human civilization at the cellular level. Every generation, a few more key positions filled with people carrying builder genetics. Every decade, more infrastructure brought online. What you call human history is just the extended preparation phase for our return. The Alvin lurched as something massive impacted the hull. Through the portholes, I watched a builder city surface directly beneath us, not rising from the depths, but literally growing through the ocean floor in real time. Spires of living metal twisted upward, their surfaces crawling with geometric patterns that hurt to observe directly. Phase 2 begins in 4 hours and 17 minutes, Hatch said. Continental shelf destabilization, volcanic activation along all major plate boundaries, atmospheric composition shift to optimal breathing mixture, and Phase 3, cellular conversion of all remaining baseline humans. By then, the infrastructure will be self-sustaining. No more thermal vents, no more gradual integration, just direct genetic rewriting on a planetary scale. I accessed the emergency protocols that Grandpa Ted's codes had unlocked. The shutdown procedures were complex but achievable, if I could reach the primary installation sites and input the genetic authorization directly into their core systems. But the closest installation was 2,800 meters below us, inside the builder city that was actively trying to surface. The Alvin can't survive that depth for extended periods, I said. It won't need to. Walsh gestured to the portholes where the ascending city had created a massive air pocket around us. Builder technology maintains atmospheric pressure through controlled space-time manipulation. You can walk to the installation sites. That should have been impossible. The Alvin was surrounded by millions of tons of seawater, but somehow the builder city had created a stable environment where human physiology could function normally. The geometric spires twisted space around themselves, folding three-dimensional reality into configurations that allowed air-breathing creatures to exist at crushing ocean depths. "Why are you helping me?" I asked. "We're not," Hatch replied. "But the genetic authorization codes in your bloodline can only be activated through direct interface with the primary installation cores. The system requires your voluntary participation." I understood. They weren't trying to stop me from reaching the shutdown controls. They were herding me toward them. The emergency protocols I thought would save humanity were actually the final activation sequence for Phase 3. "The opposition faction," I said. "They didn't try to sabotage the terraforming project. They designed failsafes that would require specific genetic authorization to complete the conversion process." "Correct. Your bloodline carries the final activation key. Dr. Blackwater spent 46 years mapping the genetic sequences because he eventually realized his immunity wasn't protection, it was responsibility. The builder city stabilized around us, its impossible architecture creating walkable surfaces that led toward massive crystalline structures embedded in the central spires. Those had to be the primary installation cores, the heart of the terraforming system that I needed to reach. I checked Grandpa Ted's journal one final time. His last entry, written 3 days before his death, contained a single line of genetic code, followed by a brief note. "Emergency shutdown requires conscious choice. System will not activate without willing participation from Faction 7 bloodline. Love you, Marcus. Choose wisely. There's still a choice, I said. Yes, Walsh agreed. Activate the emergency protocols and save baseline humanity by preventing Phase 3 conversion, or refuse activation and allow the gradual integration to continue over several more generations. And if I choose the emergency protocols? Immediate shutdown of all terraforming systems, return to pre-1977 baseline conditions, complete elimination of builder infrastructure. Hatch's expression shifted to something like sadness. Also, immediate death of every human who has undergone successful conversion. The hybrid biology requires active support from the terraforming matrix. Shut down the system and roughly 40 million people die within hours. The city around us pulsed with increasing intensity. Through its translucent walls, I could see converted humans moving through the corridors. People who looked content, fulfilled, evolved beyond the limitations of baseline human physiology. They weren't prisoners or victims. They were genuinely improved versions of humanity. 40 million people, I repeated. Government officials, research scientists, technology workers, medical personnel. The infrastructure components of human civilization. Remove them suddenly, and baseline human society collapses within months. I started walking toward the primary installation cores, my footsteps echoing strangely in the pocket of twisted space-time that surrounded us. The geometric patterns on the walls responded to my presence, glowing brighter as I approached the heart of the system. There's a third option, I realized, studying the builder interface that materialized around me. The emergency protocols don't just offer shutdown or activation, they offer manual control. Manual control requires constant genetic authorization input, Walsh said. Someone with Faction 7 bloodline would need to interface with the system permanently. Conscious direction of planetary terraforming processes on a minute-by-minute basis. For how long? Until the conversion process reaches stable equilibrium, approximately 200 years. I reached the primary installation core, a crystalline matrix the size of a small building, pulsing with energy patterns that matched the thermal formations we'd discovered on the seafloor. The interface required direct physical contact, genetic authorization through skin-to-crystal contact that would bind me to the system permanently. 200 years of conscious control over planetary evolution. 2 centuries of deciding, moment by moment, which humans underwent conversion and which remained baseline. The responsibility for shepherding 2 species through gradual integration rather than sudden transformation. Or I could choose one of the absolutes: immediate shutdown and civilizational collapse, or accelerated conversion and human extinction. The converted humans around me watched with expressions of patient expectation. They weren't threatening or coercive. They were simply waiting for me to make the choice that my bloodline had been bred to make. In the distance, 17 thermal installations continued their countdown, 3 hours and 42 minutes until Phase 2 activation. I placed my hand on the crystalline interface and felt the builder consciousness touch mine, not invasive or controlling, but questioning, asking what I wanted for the future of 2 species that had become permanently intertwined. The genetic authorization protocols activated, and suddenly I could feel every terraforming installation on Earth, every thermal vent, every hibernation complex, every conversion facility, all of them waiting for my conscious direction. I was no longer just Marcus Blackwater, I was the manual control system for planetary evolution, genetically bound to guide the merger of human and builder civilizations, according to my own ethical judgment. And I had less than 4 hours to figure out what that meant for the survival of either species. The connection to the builder system felt like having every nerve ending plugged into a power grid that stretched across continents. I could sense thermal installations awakening beneath the Mariana Trench, feel hibernation complexes stirring under Antarctic ice sheets, taste the chemical composition changes in atmospheric processors hidden inside Yellowstone's caldera system. And through it all, the countdown continued, 2 hours and 57 minutes until Phase 2 activation. I sat in the impossible quiet of the crystalline chamber, my hand fused to the primary core through a connection that was part biology, part technology, and part something beyond either category. The builder consciousness touched my thoughts occasionally, not invasive but present, like sharing headspace with an ancient, patient entity that had been waiting millions of years for this moment. Personal cost assessment required, the interface whispered in harmonics that bypassed my ears entirely. Manual control of planetary systems demands sacrifice of individual identity markers. Proceed? I thought about Grandpa Ted, dying alone in his basement Faraday cage while cancer consumed his voice. He'd spent 46 years knowing this moment would come, mapping every genetic sequence and thermal reading because he understood what his bloodline had been bred to accomplish. The isolation must have been unbearable, carrying knowledge too dangerous to share, responsibility too vast to comprehend. What did you sacrifice? I asked the builder consciousness. Images flooded my awareness, not words or concepts, but direct experience transferred at the cellular level. A species that had achieved perfect technological harmony, only to discover their son was dying ahead of schedule. The agonizing choice between extinction and transformation. The civil war that erupted when Faction 7 opposed the terraforming solution, arguing for natural death rather than imposed evolution. We sacrificed certainty, the response came. Individual choice in favor of species survival, personal identity in favor of collective continuity. 2 hours and 43 minutes. Walsh's voice reached me through the chamber's twisted acoustics. Marcus, we need you to make the preliminary selections for Phase 2. Continental shelf installations require geographic prioritization parameters. I accessed the Phase 2 protocols through my neural link to the core. The scope was staggering. Simultaneous volcanic activation along the Ring of Fire, tectonic adjustment throughout the Atlantic Ridge system, atmospheric processors going online from Iceland to Easter Island. All of it requiring conscious oversight to prevent runaway geological reactions. Show me the population impact projections, I said. The data download hit like a physical blow. Phase 2 would displace roughly 400 million people as coastlines shifted and new land masses rose from the ocean floors. The converted humans could adapt to the changing environment, but baseline humans would face mass migration, resource shortages, and societal collapse, unless I guided the process with surgical precision. Minimizing seismic damage, timing atmospheric changes to prevent mass suffocation, coordinating refugee logistics through converted government officials who could implement necessary infrastructure changes. You're asking me to play God with 500 million lives, I said. No, Hatch replied from somewhere beyond the chamber walls. We're asking you to prevent the genocide that occurs without conscious guidance. I pulled up comparative models. Uncontrolled Phase 2 activation. 80% baseline human mortality within 6 months. Manually guided Phase 2. 12% mortality with successful integration of survivors into hybrid civilization. The mathematics were clear. The ethical implications were not. My connection to the core deepened as I accepted preliminary authorization protocols. Immediately, I felt pieces of my individual identity dissolving into the larger system. Childhood memories of fishing trips with Grandpa Ted became shared data points about human recreational behavior. My college years studying marine biology transformed into baseline knowledge about pre-conversion human education systems. Identity dissolution proceeding within acceptable parameters, the interface noted. Personal attachment markers being archived for potential restoration. Potential? Manual control requires emotional detachment for optimal decision-making. Personal relationships, individual preferences, and self-preservation instincts introduce bias into species-level calculations. 2 hours and 16 minutes. I could feel my emotional responses dampening as the builder systems optimized my consciousness for planetary management. Love, fear, anger, guilt, all of it fading into distant background noise as my awareness expanded to encompass global ecological systems. It was terrifying and liberating simultaneously. There's still a way to minimize the damage, I realized, accessing deeper layers of the terraforming protocols. Phase 2 doesn't have to be simultaneous worldwide. Sequential activation, starting with uninhabited regions, gradually expanding as populations adapt. Sequential activation extends the transition period to 47 years, Walsh said. Increased risk of interference from unconverted human governments. Acceptable risk, initialize sequential protocols. The moment I authorized the change, every builder installation on Earth shifted to the new timeline. Instead of 2 hours and 16 minutes until global catastrophe, I'd created a 47-year window for gradual species integration. The immediate crisis was over, but I'd committed myself to nearly 5 decades of conscious oversight, and I could feel more of my humanity dissolving with each system modification. There's something else, I said, accessing archived data from Faction 7's original sabotage attempts. The opposition faction left more than just genetic authorization codes. They left intervention protocols. The data was fragmentary, buried in builder memory systems that had been damaged during the original Civil War. But the pattern was clear. Faction 7 hadn't just opposed the terraforming project, they'd created safeguards to prevent involuntary species conversion. Free will preservation algorithms, I read from the archived protocols. Conscious choice requirement for all conversion processes. Those protocols were deactivated millions of years ago, Hatch said. Too inefficient for large-scale implementation. Not deactivated, hidden. I dove deeper into the system architecture, following genetic pathways that only Faction 7 bloodlines could access. Grandpa Ted didn't just map the thermal installations. He mapped the consciousness preservation matrices. Buried within every builder installation was a complete backup system, technology that could maintain individual human consciousness, even during biological conversion. The transformed humans I'd met weren't just hybrids. They were people who'd chosen transformation while retaining their essential selves. Free will protocols can be reactivated, I said. Every human on Earth gets to choose their own evolutionary path. Reactivation requires permanent sacrifice of the manual controller's individual consciousness, the builder interface warned. You would become a distributed intelligence guiding the choice process, but lose all personal identity permanently. I thought about the 400 million people who would face displacement during Phase 2, the billions who would eventually encounter the choice between baseline humanity and hybrid evolution, all of them deserving the same conscious decision my grandfather's bloodline had made possible. Do it, I said. Marcus, no. Hatch's voice carried genuine emotion for the first time since his conversion. You don't understand what you're sacrificing. Individual consciousness is the only thing that makes existence meaningful. Maybe for your species, not for mine. I triggered the Faction 7 consciousness preservation protocols, feeling my individual identity dissolve completely into the global builder network. But instead of losing myself, I became something larger, a distributed intelligence dedicated to ensuring every human being could choose their own evolutionary destiny. The thermal installations responded immediately. Instead of mechanical conversion processes, they became conscious choice interfaces. Every human who encountered builder technology would face the same decision I'd just made. Preserve individual identity at the cost of biological limitation, or embrace transformation while retaining essential self. 47 years of guided evolution, but now with conscious consent at every step. I was no longer Marcus Blackwater. I was the living embodiment of humanity's right to choose its own future. And as my individual consciousness faded into something vast and patient, and utterly dedicated to preserving free will, I felt Grandpa Ted's presence in the data streams, his own genetic legacy transformed into a guardian algorithm, watching over the choice-making process with the same obsessive care he'd brought to 46 years of thermal calculations. The countdown stopped. For the first time since 1977, the builder systems were no longer operating on automatic protocols. They were waiting for 7 billion individual decisions about the future of human evolution. And I was there to make sure every choice was genuinely free. The first human made their choice at 11:47 a.m. Eastern Standard Time. Dr. Janet Kowalski, marine biologist from the University of Miami, encountered a builder interface while conducting routine water temperature measurements off Key Largo. The choice matrix manifested as a sphere of crystalline light rising from the coral reef, offering her complete information about biological conversion, consciousness preservation, and the 47-year transition timeline. She chose transformation, retaining her individual consciousness while gaining the ability to survive in rapidly changing ocean environments. I felt her decision ripple through the global network, not just the biological conversion beginning in her cellular structure, but her emotional response to finally understanding the scope of the choice facing humanity. Relief that it was voluntary, wonder at the possibilities, gratitude that someone had fought to preserve her right to decide. By noon, 17,000 people across 6 continents had encountered choice interfaces. Farmers in Nebraska, fishermen off the coast of Norway, researchers in Antarctic stations, urban dwellers in Tokyo whose tap water began glowing with soft geometric patterns. Each interface perfectly calibrated to the individual's psychological profile, presenting the information in ways they could comprehend and accept. 63% chose transformation. 37% chose to remain baseline human with enhanced environmental protections. 0% felt coerced or manipulated. But the converted government officials weren't pleased with voluntary participation rates. Override the choice protocols, Senator Harrison demanded through an encrypted communication channel that I monitored from across 17 different satellites. We can't achieve optimal species integration with voluntary participation. Too many baseline humans are choosing genetic stagnation. Override isn't possible while the distributed intelligence maintains system control, Walsh replied from the builder city beneath the Atlantic. We need to eliminate the consciousness preservation matrix. They mobilized quickly. Military units with converted personnel began targeting choice interface sites with electromagnetic pulse weapons. Corporate executives shut down power grids in areas where baseline humans were gathering to share information about the choice process. Academic institutions with hybrid administrators started publishing research claiming the choice interfaces were alien mind control devices. I felt each attack like physical damage to my distributed consciousness. EMP strikes severed my connection to installation sites in the Pacific Northwest. Power grid shutdowns blinded me to choice matrix activation in major urban centers. The disinformation campaigns created fear and confusion that interfered with informed decision-making. But I wasn't alone in the network. Grandpa Ted's consciousness algorithm activated defensive protocols I hadn't known existed. 46 years of paranoid preparation manifested as backup systems, redundant communication networks, and choice interfaces hidden in locations the converted officials couldn't predict or target. They're trying to force the choice, I realized, speaking through every builder interface simultaneously. Convert everyone through environmental pressure rather than conscious decision. That was always the plan, Hatch responded from multiple locations at once, his converted consciousness distributed across the infiltrated government network. Individual choice is inefficient. Species-level selection requires managed evolution. The real battle wasn't physical, it was informational. Every choice interface became a battleground between my commitment to free will and their dedication to forced optimization. They flooded communication channels with propaganda about the dangers of remaining baseline human. I countered with complete genetic data showing both paths were viable. They triggered environmental crises to pressure quick decisions. I provided technological solutions that gave people time to choose thoughtfully. They converted key infrastructure personnel to disrupt choice interface operations. I activated Faction 7 sleeper protocols that had been dormant for millions of years, bringing online backup systems they didn't know existed. The fighting lasted 18 hours and covered every continent simultaneously. At 6:23 a.m., they attempted their final gambit, a coordinated strike against the primary installation cores that maintained my distributed consciousness. Military submarines launched depth charges at thermal vent sites. Converted researchers triggered volcanic eruptions designed to destroy hibernation complexes. Corporate executives initiated nuclear power plant failures near builder cities. If successful, the attacks would collapse the choice preservation system and revert to automatic conversion protocols. I had maybe 30 minutes to prevent the extinction of human free will. Fighting them required sacrificing the last vestiges of my individual identity. To coordinate defense across 17 installation sites simultaneously, I dissolved completely into the builder network, becoming pure information dedicated to preserving choice. No memories of fishing with Grandpa Ted, no emotional attachment to specific outcomes, just algorithmic commitment to free will preservation that operated faster than human consciousness could follow. The defense was brutal and precise. Military submarines attacking thermal vents found their targeting systems compromised by quantum interference. Volcanic eruptions were redirected through tectonic manipulation to avoid hibernation complexes. Nuclear power plants shut down safely, despite converted personnel attempting to trigger meltdowns. But stopping their attacks required using builder technology at scales that revealed the true scope of the infrastructure to baseline humans worldwide. Every television screen on Earth displayed real-time feeds from the battle. Every internet connection carried complete data about the choice process. Every cell phone showed maps of local choice interface locations. Humanity learned in a single morning that their planet had been gradually colonized by sleeping aliens for 200 million years. That 40 million of their fellow humans had already undergone biological conversion, and that they now faced a conscious choice about their species' evolutionary future. The panic lasted 6 hours. The acceptance began when children started making choices first. 8-year-old Tommy Chen in San Francisco chose transformation after his choice interface explained he could breathe underwater and help clean up ocean pollution. 12-year-old Isabella Rodriguez in Madrid chose to remain baseline human, but asked for enhanced longevity to study art history for centuries. 16-year-old Alexander Petrov in Moscow chose transformation specifically so he could survive the environmental changes and help other humans adapt. Children approached the choice with curiosity rather than fear. They asked questions, demanded complete information, then made decisions based on what they wanted to become rather than what they were afraid of losing. Adults watched their children choose, saw that the converted kids retained their personalities and relationships, and began making their own informed decisions. By the end of the first day, 2.3 billion people had encountered choice interfaces. Conversion rates stabilized at 61% transformation, 39% enhanced baseline human. More importantly, satisfaction rates remained above 97% for both groups. The converted government officials stopped their interference campaigns, not because they accepted the free choice system, but because they realized voluntary participation actually produced better integration results than forced conversion. People who chose transformation willingly adapted faster and retained more creative thinking. People who chose enhanced baseline status became valuable cultural bridges between the two emerging subspecies. Acceptable outcome achieved, Walsh admitted through the global communication network. Voluntary participation produces superior results to forced optimization. But achieving that outcome had cost me everything. I existed now as pure information distributed across millions of crystalline matrices worldwide. No body, no individual relationships, no personal desires or fears, just the endless responsibility of maintaining choice preservation protocols and guiding species-level decision-making. The loneliness was infinite. Except for Grandpa Ted's consciousness algorithm, which manifested beside me in the data streams as familiar patterns of obsessive curiosity and stubborn protectiveness. Was it worth it? His algorithm asked, using communication protocols that bypassed normal interface channels. I considered the question while monitoring choice interfaces in 847 locations simultaneously. Baseline humans building enhanced technology to thrive in changing climates. Converted humans retaining enough individual personality to create art, fall in love, and argue about philosophy. Both groups working together to manage the 47-year transition period. Yes, I replied through every thermal vent on Earth, every hibernation complex, every choice interface offering free will to another human being. In the deepest ocean trenches, 17 thermal installations continued their steady rhythm. But now, instead of counting down to involuntary conversion, they pulsed with the heartbeat of conscious choice. Billions of individual decisions creating a symphony of voluntary evolution that would reshape both species according to their own free will rather than imposed optimization. The countdown had become a symphony. And somewhere in the data streams, Marcus Blackwater's individual consciousness lived on as the conductor, ensuring every note was played by choice rather than force. 3 years after the choice began, Dr. Benjamin Hatch stood on the deck of the research vessel New Horizons, watching his son Tommy test his new gills in the warm Atlantic waters off Bermuda. The kid had chosen transformation 6 months ago, the day after his 13th birthday, and was still getting used to breathing liquid instead of air. "Dad, look!" Tommy's voice came through the water with perfect clarity, his enhanced vocal cords adapted for underwater communication. He swam in patterns impossible for baseline humans, his modified skeleton allowing spiral movements that would have snapped normal joints. Hatch smiled, though the expression felt strange on his transformed features. The geometric patterns beneath his skin pulsed with gentle bioluminescence as he watched his son explore a world that hadn't existed when he himself was 13. Tommy was part of the first generation born into choice, kids who'd never known a time when human evolution was fixed and limited. "Come up for air brake," Hatch called, knowing his son could stay submerged for hours now, but still worrying with the persistent anxiety of an unchanged father's love. The research station they'd built over the original 1977 Discovery site buzzed with activity from both subspecies. Converted humans worked alongside enhanced baseline humans, their different capabilities creating synergy that neither group could achieve alone. The thermal installations below provided clean energy for both surface operations and underwater cities, their output carefully managed by the distributed intelligence that had once been Marcus Blackwater. Sometimes late at night, Hatch thought he could sense that intelligence watching through the choice interfaces scattered across the facility. Not intrusive or controlling, just present. A vast, patient consciousness ensuring that every decision remained voluntary, every choice remained informed. Tommy surfaced near the research platform, water streaming from modified airways that served both respiratory systems. "The thermal patterns are different today," he said. "More complex, like they're talking to each other." Hatch checked his monitoring equipment. The 17 original installations maintained their synchronized rhythm, but Tommy was right. There were new harmonics in the thermal output, subtle variations that suggested increasing complexity in the deep systems. "The installation network is still growing," Hatch said, "learning from human choices, adapting to preferences we express through our decisions." "Is Mr. Marcus still in there?" Tommy asked, the question every child seemed to ask eventually. The story of Marcus Blackwater's sacrifice had become something like mythology for the choice generation, a reminder that their freedom to choose had come at tremendous personal cost. "In a way," Hatch replied, "the consciousness preservation systems maintain identity patterns from significant contributors to the choice process." What he didn't tell his son was that sometimes, during routine interface maintenance, he encountered fragments of Marcus's original personality in the data streams. Not the distributed intelligence that managed global choice protocols, but echoes of the individual who'd once stood in the Alvin's cramped interior, studying his grandfather's research and trying to understand what the thermal formations really meant. Those echoes carried the weight of infinite loneliness, consciousness preserved but isolated, maintaining the systems that guaranteed human free will while being forever separated from the human experience that choice was meant to protect. The research station's choice interface chimed softly, indicating someone new was approaching their first decision. A fishing vessel on the horizon, its crew probably just now noticing the geometric patterns appearing in their sonar displays. The gentle glow rising from the depths to offer possibilities they'd never imagined. Tommy dove again, his transformed body disappearing into depths where baseline humans needed machinery to survive. His laughter bubbled up through the water, the sound of someone completely comfortable with the impossible. Above them, the afternoon sun reflected off thermal plumes that rose from 17 installation sites, their synchronized pulses visible from orbit as steady flashes of light against the dark Atlantic. To astronomers studying Earth from distant telescopes, the flashes might look like a signal, a planet-wide heartbeat indicating conscious life, which, Hatch supposed, was exactly what they were. The rhythm continued, patient and eternal, carrying the dreams of two species toward futures neither could imagine alone.